Imagine something lost to time, like a ghost from nearly 2 centuries ago, suddenly just reappearing. Well, that's pretty much what's happened off the coast of South Australia. There's been this recent discovery of the Koning Willem de Tweed, or Koning Willem II, as some called it. It was a Dutch ship, sank way back in 1857.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And it's more than just finding an old shipwreck. It really is like uncovering a time capsule. We've
Yeah.
been digging into the details, uh, using information from Wikipedia, naturally, but also this whole wave of news articles from just this month, May 2025. Everyone's talking about it.
Right. So for our deep dive today, we're really focusing on this whole 19th century maritime story. We want to try and piece together the life of this ship, follow its very dramatic final voyage, and really get a handle on why this rediscovery is such a big deal today, especially, for understanding migration and maritime history. Where do we start with something this rich?
I think the best place is probably the ship's origins. So before it was the Koning Willem de Tweed, its name was actually the Erf Princess van Orange,
Yeah.
which has a lovely translation, Crown Princess of Orange. Quite a name change later on.
It certainly sounds grander, doesn't it? So tell us a bit about its background, where it came from.
Okay, so it was built in Kinderdijk, that's in South Holland, a real shipbuilding center back then, specifically at the Fop Smit shipyard. The commission date we have is December 8th, 1840. And this was a pretty substantial ship for the era, about 800 tons burthen.
Burthen, that's like its cargo capacity.
Exactly, how much it could carry. Physically, it was about 140 feet long, 39 feet wide, that's the beam, and it had a draft of 13 feet. So it sat 13 feet deep in the water, mostly oak construction, very strong and fully rigged, a complex sailing ship.
Right, a proper workhorse of the seas for its time, and ownership changed a bit too, it seems.
It did, yeah, not unusual. Initially owned by a B.J. Surmerton in Rotterdam. Then by 1842, records show it registered in The Hague under Peter Varkevisser. And then finally, 1849, it's back, registered in the port of Rotterdam. Ships moved around, businesses changed.
Hmm. And the sources mention something interesting, a lack of detailed construction plans. Does that make it harder for researchers now?
Oh, definitely. It adds a layer of, well, mystery. We know the basics, the dimensions, the materials. But the finer points of its design, maybe modifications over the years, that's harder to know just from paper records, which is exactly why finding the actual wreck is so incredibly exciting. Archaeology can fill in those gaps.
Yeah, I can see that. Okay, so we have a picture of the ship itself. Let's shift focus to that final voyage, the one that ended tragically. It started in Hong Kong.
That's right. Set sail early June 1857. Captain Hendrik Remmelkiesen was in command. And importantly, on board were roughly 400 Chinese migrants.
400, wow, that's a significant number of people. Where were they headed?
The ultimate destination was the Victorian goldfields. The gold rush was a huge draw. But, crucially, they weren't sailing directly into Victoria, say to Melbourne. The plan was to land them much further west. It's a port called Robe in South Australia.
Robe. South Australia. That seems, well, quite a long way from the Victorian goldfields. Why land there?
Well, this takes us to a really significant and quite difficult part of Australian history. It's known as the Robe Walk. See, back in June 1855, the government in Victoria passed the Chinese Immigration Act. It imposed this really hefty 10-pound poll tax on every single Chinese person arriving by sea directly into Victoria. 10 pounds was a lot of money then.
A huge amount. So landing in South Australia was a way around that tax.
Exactly. South Australia didn't have that tax. So ships would land migrants at Robe or nearby ports, and then these individuals would face this incredibly arduous overland journey, about 400 kilometers or 250 miles, walking to the goldfields.
Goodness, walking 250 miles after what must have already been a long, cramped sea voyage. That speaks volumes about their determination.
It really does. And Robe became this major landing point because of it. Estimates suggest around 16,000 Chinese people arrived via Robe, mostly packed into that one year, 1857.
16,000, wow. And the Koning Willem II was part of that influx.
It was. Though, interestingly, it was one of only about 5 or 6 Dutch commercial ships involved in this particular route. Most of the ships carrying migrants this way were actually British or American.
So a smaller player in terms of nationality, but still part of this massive migration event. Okay, so they reach Robe. The passengers, thankfully, got ashore safely.
Yes, that's the crucial part. Those 400 or so individuals disembarked without incident. They made it. But then, disaster struck the ship itself. A severe storm blew up quite suddenly. And the Koning Willem II, riding at anchor, started to drag.
Yeah.
It couldn't hold its position.
Oh no, that's every sailor's nightmare in a storm near the coast. Losing anchor hold.
Absolutely terrifying. And then on June 30th, it got worse. The anchor was lost completely. And the windlass, the big mechanism for holding the anchor, it was literally ripped off the deck by the force of the storm.
It's just torn away.
Torn away. At that point, Captain Gazin really had no choice. He tried to deliberately beach the ship, run it aground to save the vessel and his crew.
Did he manage to beach it?
He did, yes, but it ended up grounding on Long Beach, which is about 5 kilometers, maybe 3 miles or so, east of Robe Township. But the location wasn't sheltered enough. The seas were incredibly heavy, just pounding the ship relentlessly. And it began to break apart very, very quickly.
That sounds horrific. What happened to the crew who were still on board?
It's truly tragic. There were 25 crew members, 16 of them drowned. They'd tried to get ashore in one of the ship's small boats, but it capsized in the huge surf near the beach, just overwhelmed.
16 lives lost. That's awful. And the captain, Gazin.
He had a very near miss. He actually stayed with the wreck as it was breaking up. Eventually, he managed to grab onto a floating cask, and people on the shore saw him. They threw out a rope and managed to pull him in. Incredible survival story, really.
Absolutely desperate. The sources also mention something quite remarkable, an attempted rescue by an Aboriginal man. That adds another layer to the human drama.
It really does. An Aboriginal man from nearby Encounter Bay showed incredible courage. He tried to swim out through the breaking waves towards the wreck, carrying a line for what's called a breeches buoy. It's a rescue device, like a harness on a pulley system. But the conditions were just too severe. His attempt, though incredibly brave, was ultimately unsuccessful.
Such bravery in the face of impossible conditions. And the sailors who drowned.
Their bodies were later recovered from the beach and buried right there. A very somber end to the voyage.
And Captain Gazin faced some legal issues afterward.
Yeah, the records are a bit hazy, but there seems to have been some kind of lawsuit involving him, maybe in the 1860s. But the exact nature of it and how it concluded, that's still unclear. It's another one of those threads historians might pull on.
Right. So the ship is wrecked, lives tragically lost. What became of the wreck itself over the years? Did anything get salvaged?
Oh, yes. A few months after the sinking, the wreck, what was left of it, was sold. A local Robe resident, Jacob Chambers, bought it for $225, and he undertook pretty significant salvage work. He managed to recover quite a lot, actually. Things like 2 cannons, a smaller swivel gun, the ship's figurehead, the carving on the bow, the ship's bell, plus doors and timbers.
Wow. So pieces of the ship literally became part of the local landscape, perhaps. You mentioned local legends like a cannon at the customs house.
Exactly. And a school bell, too. For a long time, local tradition held that these came directly from the Koning Willem de Tweed. It makes for a good story.
But maybe not entirely accurate.
Well, that's where more recent research comes in. It's cast some doubt on those specific items. The cannon, for instance, its design looks perhaps more British than Dutch for that period. So some historians now think it might actually be from another shipwreck near Robe the Sultana, which wrecked just a couple of months before the Koning Willem II in April 1857.
Oh, interesting. So close together.
Yeah. And the school bell's origin is also questioned now. It's a great example of how local lore and historical investigations sometimes diverge, isn't it? History evolves.
It really does. Which, of course, brings us right up to the present day and this exciting rediscovery. Sounds like finding it was a real collaborative effort.
Absolutely. It actually started before the pandemic with the Dutch government reaching out to the Australian National Maritime Museum, the ANMM. They worked through this Netherlands Shared Cultural Heritage Program, and they teamed up with the Silent World Foundation, the SA Department for Environment and Water, and also researchers from Flinders University, pooling resources and expertise.
And it wasn't a quick find, was it? This took years of looking.
No, not at all. James Hunter, who was the curator of Naval Heritage and Archaeology at ANMM, he'd been leading trips to the area searching since way back in 2002.
2 decades.
Yeah, incredible dedication and persistence. And it finally paid off.
And the real significance of finding this specific wreck, it goes beyond just, ticking a box on a list of lost ships.
Oh, much further. Because the ship grounded and then broke up relatively quickly, the thinking is that a lot of material might still be trapped within the wreck site, preserved underwater. Artifacts, personal belongings perhaps, things that could give us really tangible insights into the lives of both the crew and, importantly, those Chinese migrants. It could shed so much light on the human side of that Robe Walk story, the conditions on board, what people brought with them, the everyday details.
Offering a direct link back to those individuals. And the big news, just this month, May 2025, is that they've actually pinpointed the main wreckage site.
That's the announcement. They've located the main... Well, we've followed this Dutch ship's journey. its construction, its role in that huge wave of Chinese migration driven by the gold rush. We've talked about the incredible hardship of the robe walk, that attempt to bypass discriminatory laws. Then the tragedy of the wreck itself, the storm, the terrible loss of crew life. And now this really exciting potential the rediscovered wreck holds for revealing more about this whole chapter of history.
Yeah, it really is this fascinating blend, isn't it? You've got Dutch maritime history, the really important story of Chinese migration to Australia, and even those points of contact with Indigenous Australians during the rescue attempts. It shows how interconnected history is.
Completely. It reminds you that these aren't just dry historical events. They're packed with complex human stories, struggles, hopes, bravery. And finding the wreck itself, well, it gives us a chance to maybe connect with those individual experiences on a deeper level.
Absolutely. So I guess the thought to leave you, the listener, with is what else might be down there? What could future archaeological work at this site uncover? Personal items, tools, fragments of daily life from both the European sailors and the Chinese passengers. What could those discoveries tell us not just about this one ship, but about the broader sweep of global migration, resilience, and human experience in the 19th century? It's a pretty compelling question to ponder.